got Lyman Grant, who's the Dean of Arts and Humanities at Austin Community College. He's been a longtime stalwart of the Austin poetry scene. We've got 4 books back there that you've got.
There are 3 with poetry in them.
3 with poetry in them, and then
And an anthology.
and an anthology, which came out like 92, 93.
Yeah.
I remember because Liz Garten reviewed it for Borderlands. So we've got Lyman Grant, and we're going to talk about writing poetry. So welcome to W. Joe's Poetry Corner. So Lyman, the first question I always ask, why poetry?
Well, where do I talk?
I don't know, talk to the camera, talk to the people.
audience. I've never been on Letterman before.
Yeah.
The truth is, I don't know. If you're talking about, personally for me, why poetry?
That's what I'm talking about.
It's just something I started doing when I was 14, 12, 14,
Okay.
something like that. It seemed to say things that I wanted to say, and it was not great literature. I was reading Rod McEwen that my sister gave me because she was going to UT and she loved Rod McEwen, as a lot of co-eds did at the time. And at 14, I was as good as I knew.
Okay. Yeah, that's a big part of it, is being exposed.
And then certainly pop songs, were important. And that was a time when people were trying to be relevant. Teachers wanted to be relevant, so they would include, Paul Simon in English, 10th grade English, and things like that, which I was appalled by, actually.
Leonard Cohen was in the North.
Was he? Yeah. And I remember there was a thing on Richard Wilbur in the 10th grade anthology, and I was sort of fascinated by him. And so, and then it just became, because there was sort of a youngish man at that time, whatever he was.
He was a serious poet.
Yeah, but so was he 30, 35 at that time that they had him in the book, and so he seemed young. And then it became American literature and British literature. And so William Blake was really important. Wrote my senior research paper on William Blake. And so anyway, so it's, I don't know, it said something that I want to say. Also, my dad, of all people, really, he had an anthology of American literature, or a couple, and he could quote Whittier and some Longfellow, and because his mother was a teacher, and I think in the turn of the century or 1920s, so she was a teacher, so she brought those American writers to him, and he could actually still quote at age 60, 65 certain stanzas, that were jingoistic, and certainly had been replaced by Pound and William Carlos Williams and Ginsberg, and but at the time they were the American poets.
So along with the why poetry, maybe just another way of doing it. And you said it spoke to you as a medium, I guess. What does poetry do that other art forms can't do? Another way to look at it.
Well, one is, I think that there's an obvious kind of recurring music to it, and so going back to the troubadours and that type of poetry, it was intimately tied to music, and so I think, and then we've kept that going with the kind of music, that has changed by the century, but there's I don't know, it's beautiful, right? And
Well, but you gotta tell me why.
And it's concise.
Okay.
The economy and how concise it is. But in terms of meaning and the way words will collide with each other, you know, in a line, in a sentence. So they'll start shoving against each other, where you hope that these words will really start elbowing each other a little bit to make space for themselves, and then to overlap or hug as we did outside. I mean, the words in this line will, you know, when it's happening right, we'll start to do that. And then, you know, and I love all that old-fashioned stuff of alliteration and consonants and still rhyme.
And you've been talking about lately, you've been using form. You've got a manuscript that's using a lot of forms. You want to tell us about that? What forms are you using?
Well, I mean, I've kind of gone in and out of kind of a free verse and even concrete poetry, so I've tried to experiment with just about anything I can come up with. But I have to admit, I haven't written in the last 2 years, but the 2 years before that, I was writing in form. And so how it began was working with Sean Camp, the painter, and he was doing paintings, and I was trying to write things that related to the paintings. And his paintings are very large, but they're in big rectangles or
Have
big
you got
squares.
the book with his cover?
No,
on it?
I don't have that one.
Okay.
I don't have that one.
So one of Lyman's books had the Sean Camp as the cover.
And he lives in your
neighborhood,
neighborhood, and
Yeah.
he teaches at ACC.
Oh, good guy.
But so he does these kind of circles that then are off the page. Part of it's off the painting, and then there are these squares and bits and pieces. And he called that established parameters that exhibit. So then I thought, what are the established parameters of what I do? And it's one thing that it is form.
Right.
And so what I wanted to try to do is kind of have the essentially a prosy sentence, you know, a readable sentence, you know, almost a vernacular sentence that fit within the forms. That was my goal. And then I started, so that's one section of this book. Another section of the book is kind of trying to deal with librettos from operas. And that started while going to an opera, going to operas and watching the subtitles or the super titles, and kind of rewriting them because they're horrible. You know, so, oh dear, I love life. Do you love life? Oh yes, I love life. And it's, oh little bird of mine, you know. And so I kept thinking.
Sounds better in Italian.
Yeah, it does. It sounds a lot better in Italian. And so I was kind of trying to rewrite them, kind of going, how can you turn them into poems? And then it turned into something bigger where I was actually I was actually just dealing with the theme of it and then trying to make it contemporary. So terza rima,
Explain these things
sestinas,
to,
you know, no, I'm not going to explain all that. But terza rima, sestina, rondelles, rondeaus, a lot of the French forms, sonnets.
And these are all pretty much like 13th, 14th century
Yeah, a lot of
things.
Did I say sestina?
Sistina, Terza Rimas,
Yeah.
Dante.
You know, and then some were I just was trying to revise some, and I did it in heroic couplets because that's really tedious.
Well,
And it's Alexander Pope. It's very hard not to be sing-songy.
and what's the thrill of form?
It's well, one, I think it is a heuristic. I mean, it's.
Oh, what's that mean?
I don't know exactly, but it's kind of a writing prompt. It's a way to kind of generate material. I mean, and it's for the beginning poet, very often that we see in first classes, it's, I really love the moon, and then you're going moon, June, loon, you know, and then you come up with a rhyme and then you write a line to it, you know. And so that's one way. That's not necessarily the good way it's used, but then if you really accept it as a challenge, like what can I say that maybe hasn't been said before? You know?
But it has
So
to be
maybe
in
if
a
it's
form.
if
You
it's
have to do
June,
it.
then maybe say return. And that's sort of a half rhyme, not a
Okay.
full rhyme. You catch a little bit of a consonant and a little bit of a vowel sound, but you don't get it all. And so you can maybe do something slightly different.
So you say, I'm going to write a sonnet or a sestina first, and then you come up with a poem? Which comes
it goes all,
first?
it all kind of goes either way.
Either way.
You know,
Okay.
sort of the lyrics and the music question.
Okay.
You know, sometimes
Depends on-
sometimes it's the form that's first, and sometimes I'm writing and then the form did it. In fact, when I started the opera project, I wrote them as free verse,
Mhm.
and then this kind of, why not try to rewrite these as?
Well, no, come on, was it just a why not, or there had to be some aesthetic decision?
I like the challenge.
Okay.
You know, I like that sort of to see if I can do it. You know,
Well,
pushing the rock.
Okay,
up
so
there.
there's the, see if
So it's
the poet
entertaining.
can
So it's
do it.
entertaining me.
You're entertaining, okay.
That's what it's about. Is to entertain me.
Okay, so you're keeping yourself amused, and hopefully the
Well,
reader
hopefully
will.
someone else chuckles in the background.
Okay, okay. And Lyman took the last year as a sabbatical, and you saw, it was a literary journey. You went to
Yeah.
47 states.
Yeah.
You missed Florida.
Yeah.
And
I missed happiness.
So I read a bunch of your blog
Yeah.
posts, and like went to Whitman's grave, went to Carlos Williams' grave, and tell us about your trip.
So my wife, who's here, I got a sabbatical, and we were going to, you know, do what I was supposed to do because I got the sabbatical, and then somehow.
Wait, what were you supposed to do?
I'm not going to say. I was supposed to develop some classes, and I was taking some classes. I did take the classes, and I sort of half did the development, but that's my project next year, is to do that. And so it'll be a clean slate after about 2 years, but it'll be okay. And
They'll forget about it?
so we, I'm sorry?
They'll forget about it.
They'll forget about it, okay. So then we decided, my wife had been following homeschool, we homeschool our 2 kids, and so my wife had been following homeschool blogs of families who travel around the United States. And so there actually is a large number of those people, you know, maybe not the thousands, but the scores, I guess, of people out there doing that. And so as we just talked, we just decided, let's buy a 5th-wheel trailer, you know, 34 foot, get what I call the big-ass truck to pull it, and go see America and continue to homeschool our kids as we do so. And I wanted to, so my project then became, I wanted to write a blog, and then hopefully a book comes out of it. Maybe, and I'd hoped some poems would come out of it, but they didn't. But I have 200,000 words of prose that came out of it, and you know, and a lot of bad snapshots and things like that. So, but we did the blog, and I wanted. So my project on the trip became, can I understand America? I mean, not too big a question.
Right. Wow, where do you even start?
And so, well, where we started was Oklahoma with Woody Guthrie.
Okay.
Right? You know,
Yeah.
that's because when we had to get out of Texas as fast as possible. And it was August, and we wanted to get out of the heat, so we headed north. So we did a lot of things. You know, we've been, on your recommendation, we did make it to Detroit, did make it to Dearborn and the village, Greenfield Village.
Yeah,
Remember?
oh, good.
We made the Greenfield Village and the Henry Ford.
Yeah, it's called the Henry Ford.
The Henry Ford. What a
It used to be
stupid-
called the Henry Ford Museum.
Now it's the Henry Ford. It's the, you know, and we looked at a lot of cars. You know, and that was because my 16-year-old is in love with cars. He's he's in lust with automobiles. And so what a great place to see the history of the automobile and that sort of thing. So anyway, the writers, I saw the grave very often. My family did not go with me when I indulged in my love of cemeteries. I wore them out looking for Hoagie Carmichael in Bloomington. And they kind of went, well, if this is what it's going to be like, maybe we don't need to be on every one of these. But we did find, Hoagie Carmichael's grave, which is just great. And
What's it look like?
it is a stone.
No stardust?
No, it seemed like a regular stone. And my 11-year-old found it. We were
Wow.
driving around. He was the one who found it. But he's with his family. I had gone to Burroughs, one of the odd things in St. Louis, so I went to Burroughs' grave, and the odd thing is he's buried with his parents, right? This is and his grandfather, who so one of the wild men of 20th century literature made it back home, So, but we visited, the namesake of Malvern. I saw Henry. Herman Melville, William Carlos Williams, a lot of jazz greats, Whitman, Elizabeth Cady Stanton's family grave, and on Dan Blocker.
All right.
Haas.
Yeah.
He's up in DeKalb, Texas, and we walked the walk of Wallace Stevens.
Oh, wonderful.
From Hartford to his home, to basically 2.5 miles. And the whole family did that one Sunday afternoon.
One Sunday morning?
No, it wasn't Sunday morning, it was Sunday afternoon. It should have been Sunday morning. But it took a while to get there from Massachusetts. And, and more, I don't know. My favorite was my wife really indulged this one. We did go to Robert Duncan's house where he and Jess lived. So we didn't see a lot in San Francisco, but I did make it to that. And then Eric Hoffer, if you know the longshoreman philosopher, he wrote The True Believer in the 50s and then wrote a bunch of essays and aphorisms and things. That was a 2-hour pacing up in front, and my son fell asleep in the car, and Colleen, I think, was reading a novel or something, but we finally found it. Well, I finally found it, but with my wife's name, because you see on Find the Grave, there's a photograph of graves, and so we could see the grave, which was flat, right? It's one of those flat stones in a field of flat stones. So where is it? And so we're looking at the trees and where the tree is bent by how far away is it. Luckily they didn't use any trick lenses or anything, like they do in movies. And so we finally found the tree leaning at the right angle. And Eric Hoffer was very important to me as a college student.
So what's the impact then of being at someone's grave? Why is it worth going all over to do this?
I thought about that a lot, actually, because a lot it could take two forms, right? It could take the form of the poet visiting the grave, like we read those memento mori poems, the stone, so it becomes, William Carlos Williams, who wrote of wheelbarrows and chickens, who stood at his refrigerator, and it becomes this sort of thing, and I could never get myself to write that sort of thing, and then a lot of the other factor in it is that it's, it's go see it and leave. I mean, it isn't like
you get to leave, right?
You get to leave, right? Unless one is struck with awe, but you go, and then what do? It's kind of like the Grand Canyon. I mean, it's the joke of the Grand Canyon. You get to the Grand Canyon, you go, wow, that's a big hole in the ground. And so you get to William Carlos Williams'